and live streamed. And with that, I'll take this adjournment for this meeting of the Executive Committee of the 16th of August 2023. I see that we already have Councillors Allison, Brown, Carmichael, Councillor Chalmers. No, I see Councillor Chalmers is participating remotely. I see that we have Councillor Clark, Councillor Convery, Councillor Cooper. And I'm not seeing Councillor Cooper present, so we'll record her apologies. We have Councillor Cowan, Councillor Devlin, apologies from Councillor Fagan, and I see that Councillor Kerr is here substituting for Councillor Fagan. We have Councillor Ferguson Miller, Councillor Hamilton, Councillors Horsham, Logan, Loudon, Hugh MacDonald, McCallan and McClymont. We have apologies from Councillor Kenny McCreary and Councillor Lambie. I see that you're here substituting for Councillor McCreary. Have apologies from Councillor Leslie MacDonald, and just checking to see if we have a substitute. Yes, Councillor Cowie is substituting for Councillor MacDonald, and I see that she's in the meeting remotely. Councillor McGeever is present, as are Councillors McLachlan, Nelson, Razak, Robb, Ross, Shearer and Walker. So there are also a number of officers present at the meeting, and with that, Chair, I'll hand back to you for the business.
Thanks very much for that, Pauline. John.
Councillor Anderson, you're quite right. Please accept my apologies. I do have you marked present, but I didn't call your name out, so apologies for that.
Thank you. Is there any declaration of interest? Okay, none. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can we agree the minutes of the previous meeting, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thanks very much. Item 3, Revenue Budget Monitoring Period 1, April 2023. Sorry, Alec, I beg your pardon.
Sorry, the Chair's PC is timed out, so I'm going to log in again.
Story of my life.
There we go.
Thank you.
Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. At the last executive meeting, I raised a point of urgent business regarding the Leisure Trust, and the outcome of that was an action, I'll read it, in respect of actions arising from SLLC commissioned external legal review of the lessons learned and what could be shared. The Chief Executive said he was going to take advice. That report has now been made available on request to all councillors. So therefore, I'm wondering how this action is now going to be taken forward.
So, Alec, we had a meeting during the week. As you know, what's going to happen, first of all political groups in this council will get access to that document. And once the groups have analysed the document, then we'll come back and the Chief Executive will come to a meeting and give a report back and the relevant things they can talk about. I thought that's what was agreed.
Yeah, I'm just highlighting the
so
fact
that's going to get taken forward.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So this takes us up to the middle of last month. It gives us the figures to the 14th of July. So in the report, in its main body, we pick up two significant issues, and they're both within social care. So first of all, at 4.2, you can see there a reference to children and families. So what is the issue? You can see a reference to budget pressures within that service relating to residential placements, fostering and kinship care. How's that being funded? That's covered at 4.3. There's one-off funding identified totalling £9.2 million. That is available this financial year to contribute towards those residual cost pressures. At 4.4, it covers a long-term solution, and the resource is working towards managing that pressure in year 2024-25. Now, on the second page of the paper, it covers the other issue that I referred to a second ago, and that's job evaluation. So remember, this is a cost that sits within the IJB, but because of the integration model, the costs are reported through this report as well. So in terms of what's been spent at mid-July, costs of £1.9 million have been incurred in relation to the cost of grade changes. There is a paper later on the agenda which talks about back pay. So again, at 4.6, there's a reference to a solution for ongoing cost. Officers within the IJB are looking to identify solutions, and there is a report going in September to the IJB on this. Section 5 covers the housing revenue account, and within the housing revenue account we have a break-even position. So if I can go back to the recommendations, it's pretty simple that the break-even positions on the general fund and on the housing revenue account be noted. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. I'll move that report.
I'll second it.
Is there any questions or observations to Paul? Don't see any. Thank you. We'll go to item 4, capital budget 223-24. You again, Paul.
Yep,
Thank
so
you.
this time it's the capital budget. So that the paper starts off by talking about what the programme is. So we've now got a revised programme of £83.3 million, right? And that includes a number of adjustments that are covered in the appendix. Now, you can see that on page 28. What that mainly reflects is additional funding from external bodies. So there's £1.3 million being added into the programme. There's 3 main items that make that up. You can see those in pages 28 and 29. There's an amount of £500,000 for the Nature Restoration Fund. There is Road Safety Improvement Fund money, which is just under £500,000. And there's just under £250,000 for Inspiring School-Age Childcare Spaces programme. So these are monies that are being added into the capital programme. The second page of the paper deals with where we are in terms of spend in comparison to where we would expect to be at this point. So you can see at the top of that page at 4.3, we're slightly behind programme by £142,000. Section 5 looks at the housing capital programme. Again, there's an addition to the housing capital programme, which is proposed that it be increased by £1.68 million, and that's to reflect the expenditure on new build homes at Whitlaburn. So that gives a revised programme, which you can see at 5.3 of just over £69.5 million. So if I can go back to the recommendations, Chair, it's that the position be noted and that those adjustments to the general fund and the housing programmes be approved. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Is there any questions or observations? Kirsten?
Thank you. Thanks for the report as well. Just to ask about the Road Safety Improvement Fund, is there any more information on the projects and the timescale for the spend on that, please?
Paul?
Okay, this is probably one for David Booth to pick up. I will pass over to David just now. If we've not got further information, I can get that and get back to you though, Councillor Rob.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Paul. Councillor Rob, work is getting undertaken just now in developing that, so we're happy to provide you with information, council information, once it's available.
Okay, Kirsten. Thank you. Can we... Paul?
Thanks, Chair. So this is just noting the extra funding that's come in. So there's additional revenue funding of £458,000 identified for the current year, capital funding of £1.020 million. So you can see that the revenue funding on page 35, the capital funding on page 36, and that's two of the items that we covered in the previous paper. So again, any questions, happy to pick them up, Chair.
Thanks. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Is there any questions to Paul? It's quite straightforward. Can we agree to the report? Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Chair. So this is providing the committee with an overview of the support provided to households in South Lanarkshire significantly impacted by the cost of living crisis. And what you'll see from the foot of the first page is that this gives an update on items that were reported to committee through 2 reports in September and November last year. So you can see there at 3.3, there's a synopsis of the September report, which noted a package of cost of living supports to a value of £92 million, right? And also referenced new measures in 22-23. And then it references 3.4, a report at the end of November, which was to progress a range of initiatives to further support households, and there was funding of £4.68 million allocated to deliver those. So what this paper does is provide an update in terms of last year and the spend, and also this year, because there's elements of this that carry on to this year. It takes it in order of those 2 committee reports. So what you'll see is that the September report is covered in sections 4, 5 and 6, and then the November report gets covered in section 7. So just in terms of that September report in sections 4, 5 and 6, 4 covers the new supports that were identified in that September report, 5 covered things that were existing supports, and 6 covers school meal debt. So I'll go through those. There is a fair amount of detail. I'm sure you'll bear with me on this. In terms of new supports, the first thing that get picked up was the Financial Wellbeing Support Fund. So this was about cash payments of £250 to the most vulnerable households. So what the paper gives are metrics around support. That supported 5,137 households. It distributed £1.2 million. And again, you can see at 4.14, the fund is expected to finish in June, by which point it's forecasted to support 6,000 households with a spend of 1.625 against an allocation of 1.64. There is a proposal at the end of that section 4.1 about unspent monies. And that relates to monies in 2023-24, which could be reallocated to the Financial Wellbeing Support Fund and reframed around the value of payments being £50 to ensure that funds are able to support many more families. And what it's estimated there is that the funding will support 4,250 families per year over the course of the next 2 years. In terms of fuel support, there's an arrangement referenced there around the Fuel Bank Foundation to allow referrals. The paper goes on to talk then at 4.2 about energy support and what was achieved. And again, there's an element of underspend there, and that proposal is referenced again. So what's been talked about there is the money that was unspent in 2022-23 going again to this fund to meet these £50 payments to continue this support to people. There's also a reference to energy advisors that were employed and also to the capped meter fund. And again, at 425, there was spend of £45,000 achieved against an allocation of £50,000 for that money. The Education Advice Project is covered at 4.3. This didn't get the uptake that we might have hoped. So you can see there at 432, it says that there was considerable investment by Money Matters staff, but it didn't get the volume of referrals hoped for. So there was action taken that the staff were redeployed into Money Matters to assist in meeting the rising demand the service was experiencing. So the money was spent on support initiatives. Section 4.4 covers other supports. So there's reference there to digital inclusion projects, to lived experience funding, and also to a Money Matters employability advisor who was taken on. And again, that's worth highlighting. It gives a bit of background to that advisor post. The advisor opened 455 new cases by the end of the year, dealing with just over 280 clients. And in terms of financial benefits, those are outlined there as well. So those were the new supports. The next section 5 gives an update in terms of the things that were described in that September paper as existing supports. So there's an overview given there of the activity of the Money Matters service, and you've got some of the key statistics in there. You can see at 513 the number of clients who sought debt advice, the number of clients who sought benefit advice, and you can see in the table at the foot of page 40 the gain in terms of welfare support. So 27 and £2/3 million total calculated financial benefit coming through that activity. On page 41 at 516, there's a bit of information about how people access the service. So the majority of the clients that we have are now contacting us through either telephone or online means, but face-to-face appointments are still available should a client request one. We also cover off at 5.2 the Scottish Welfare Fund, and the key figures going through that: grants to a value of £3.4 million. There is an award rate of 62%. That's 2% lower than 2021-22. And at 5.3 we cover support for tenants. So there's reference in there to the tenants tenancy sustainment fund, and also to other monies that are made available to people within the social and the private rented sector. In terms of provision of benefits, that's the last element of this section, which is covered at 5.4. And the point I would make there is that we shouldn't forget that the council processes nearly £86 million worth of other benefits, and those are the things you can see covered in those bullet points. The last area that was covered in the September report is at section 6, and that's about school meal debt. So school meal debt of £100,000 was identified for consideration. Up to this point, £77,000 of that has been approved for write-off following consideration by the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee. So that's the content that was in the September report, and the paper then goes on to look at the November report, which went to the Executive Committee at the end of that month, and there were 5 areas within that. 7.1 covers investments and initiatives. We've got support for food banks, extending school meal payments to weekends, a further energy support payment, and initiatives around looked after children. So if I cover off, first of all, investments and initiatives, there was a payment referenced to SLLC within that. There's a background given on that payment at section 7.12. That touches on the fact that there was a risk that without the payment, SLLC would not have been financially stable enough to meet their obligations and continue in business for the remainder of the year. What that payment that was made meant was that facilities stayed open. So at 7.13, it covers the fact that it enabled SLLC to keep all the facilities that were operating at that time open through the winter period and available for the community to access. As a result, people across our communities had open access to warm space throughout winter 2022-23. 7.14 picks up initiatives that were carried out within libraries and stay and play sessions that were organised after book bug events. So this picks up the point that library staff have highlighted the extensive use made of library spaces by individuals and families across that period. Families were encouraged to stay for a warm drink and access to books, games and toys after the book bug sessions. And the paragraph closes by noting the fact that between November and March, book bug sessions attracted over 13,000 children and almost 12,000 adults. General use of the stay and play sessions was monitored, and feedback from library staff reported that uptake was high. Section 7.15 covers free community lets. So across halls and leisure sites, there were over 1,360 events delivered under that warm welcome initiative. There are also case studies included at the rear of the paper as Appendix 1, which illustrate the benefits experienced by community groups as a result of the initiative. And that section on the activity through SLLC closes with a reference to the free swims. So there were 26,931 free swims recorded between November and March 2022-23. Paper goes on to look at support for food banks, so 57,700 people supported. There are references there to the increases in terms of people and households supported, so 45% increase on people and 19% on households. In terms of extending school meal payments to weekends, what was that? Well, you can see that first part of 7.3, it was about providing cash payments to households with children in receipt of free school meals to cover weekend days from the beginning of November to the end of March. So there were a total of 9,544 pupils supported through that, and you can see the value of that payment there. There's a reference to the additional money that was put in through energy support payment. So we did cover that earlier in the paper. And then you can see the reference at 7.5 to looked after children. So there was a cost of £112,000. We had provided funding of 135. So the majority of that was spent, and the bullet points at the foot of that page cover the initiatives that were operated under that. The paper does close at section 8 by giving just a summary of the points made. It does make the point that the issues that we faced last winter haven't gone away. The Council will continue to provide support from the range of services and budgets available. However, the challenges councils are facing are a limiting factor on the extent to which we'll be able to provide support over the coming winter. If I can go back to the recommendations in the paper, there are two main areas here. The first is that the range of supports referenced in the paper be noted, and that the redirection of the 2023-24 funding for energy support to the Financial Wellbeing Support Fund outlined in section 4.1 be approved. So, Chair, sorry for the length of the report, but happy to take any questions.
Yeah, and it was a very detailed and comprehensive support, so don't apologise. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Is there any questions or observations? Who have we got this into here first? Andrea, take you first, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Paul. Very detailed report. Unfortunately, we have to have a report like that, highlighting the cost of living crisis, but thank you very much for all your work. First of all, I've got a wee question, and then I've just got a remark. Could I maybe ask if there's an update on the homelessness waiting list for housing? Just wondering where that stands at the moment. I'm sure most of the councillors here will be finding that housing is the main caseload and casework that we're getting. Almost every inquiry I get from a constituent is about housing. And I just wondered if I could have an updated number for the homelessness waiting list.
Andrea, would it be okay if Stephen gave you that information?
Yep.
Do you have it to hand, Stephen, or can you get it? You got when you go.
Yep, Councillor Cowan, thanks very much. I don't have a number for you, but not surprisingly, I can tell you about the trend, and the trend is at a national and at a South Lanarkshire level, the trend is increasing, but I can get the number to you. It's something that we monitor on a monthly basis.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Andrea.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
If I can just go on and just quickly make my second point,
Sure.
if you don't mind. I'm just going back to 7.2, which is the food banks. First of all, obviously, I'd like to thank the community groups and the church groups and obviously the food banks themselves for all the support and all the work they've done supporting our communities. Without them, goodness knows where some people would be. So thank you for very much. What they do is remarkable. But I've got to say that these figures today that are highlighted for the food bank use, I think, are just horrific. So, 60,000 people, almost 60,000 people being supported by food banks last year, 45% increase on the previous year. But I'm going to say most horrifying, because I am absolutely horrified by this. Most horrifying for me is that almost 22,000 children are being supported by food banks. And really, in this day and age, that is just unacceptable. 33% increase on last year's figure. And I don't have a question, because I know that the answers don't really lie within this room, but I would just make the point, because it's very current, that this, for me, demonstrates the UK government's two-child cap, rape clause.
Andrea, let's stick to the agenda.
Full action. I'm just saying it has a detrimental.
I know. You're making a speech now. You're not asking a question.
No, I said it wasn't a question.
Report.
Excuse me, Chair, I said it wasn't a question, it was a comment. It was really just to say that these figures, for me, out of all of the information we've had today, are the worst. Thanks very much.
And Ria, everybody in this room and every councillor supports what you're saying. So there's no dispute.
Excuse me, I don't doubt that. I wasn't looking
Thank
for
you.
an argument.
Thanks for your contribution. Robert.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just wanted to make really a comment, because I think what's demonstrated here, apart from the points that have been made already about the extent of the crisis, I mean, the number of people supported, the 5,137, the financial wellbeing support, the 8,000 with energy vouchers, and the 1360 events and all that, I think it does demonstrate the importance of a local response to these things. A point I think is quite important to make, given some of the centralisation efforts that have been in the recent past. It's not just the council, though the council played a hugely important part in this. It's also the community groups of various kinds. And I think central government should be aware and should continue to be aware and should have it brought to their attention at every possible opportunity, just how important the local response is to these things. We've got a major problem. It's got a whole series of reasons why it's happening in both energy and in cost of living support. It's clearly going to be continuing for some while yet. And we want to have the tools from central government to be able to respond to this adequately. And I do think this is a point we need to make at every possible opportunity. Sorry to go on about that, but it's something I feel quite passionately about, because we do want an effective response to these things. We have had a reasonably effective response within the limits we've got over the last year. And we want to have continuing tools to be able to do this going forward. Thanks, Chair.
And thank you, Robert. And we'll certainly raise these things at any venue we can. Thank you. Ross.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a question on page 42 of the pack, 7.1.2 and 7.1.3. So it's the section of the agenda papers which is discussing the additional funds given to SLLC to help them provide their warm welcome initiative. So it outlines quite helpfully the timeline of the funds that were given to SLLC. It was firstly an additional £1 million, which was kind of a repeat of what they got the year prior to replace lost revenue from COVID. Then the SLLC came back, asked for further money. They were eventually given another £2 million, and that was, as it says in the papers, part of the council's warm welcome initiative. So it was £3 million in total went to SLLC. Now, only a matter of months after that additional funds, SLLC came back to us again and said, we don't have enough funds to run our business. We need to close dozens of venues across the community. So that gives us a very clear timeline of SLLC's finances. So what I can't see in here is I'm just worried about how much of that £3 million actually went to support the Warm Welcome Initiative, how much of it was spent by SLLC on that purpose. We did ask in this executive committee, the last two executive committees, for that information, and it's still not coming. I can only deduce from this timeline that the £1 million spent on the terrible employment tribunal disaster came from funds which were earmarked to support our community in their times of most need.
Ross, I'm going to stop you. We've agreed
a question is coming. If you give me my 3 minutes, Chair.
I'll tell you, I'm not going to stop anybody from speaking, but we've agreed a course of action.
I've not agreed anything.
We've agreed a course of action.
I've not agreed anything.
Previously, when we spoke about the minutes of the previous meeting, we agreed a course of action. Whether you agreed with it or not is irrelevant in the sense
I'm an elected member.
This committee. Carry on, but if you start to stray off this agenda, I'm going to cut you off.
No, I'm not going to stray off the agenda. I'm talking about page 42, 7.1.
That's fine.
7.1.3.
And I think Paul Manning eloquently answered the question and gave a detailed, comprehensive report. So carry on.
Yeah. So
carry on.
What I'm looking for, and we've asked twice in the previous two executive committees, is how much of that £3 million actually made its way to support the community for their Warm Welcome Initiative, because we have fears, which I welcome anyone in this executive committee to prove to me otherwise, that £1 million of that money went to an employment tribunal fund.
Again,
so
well,
the
listen,
question is...
Well, get the question, please, and stop straying away for the agenda.
This
please.
is the agenda. This is how...
Well, if you do it again, I'm going to cut you off.
But the report is about the cost of living support. So I'm talking about how the money of cost of living was spent.
Right,
So I've
fine.
got a concern.
And you'll get an answer. You'll
Yeah,
get
so
an
the
answer.
question is, either can you, and this one's directed at yourself, Chair, what was the administration complicit in this, that you gave the money saying it was for support of the community, but actually it was a done deal that this was going to go away and settle the employment tribunal? Or the other option is that the administration had no idea this is what SLC were up to and you guys were asleep at the wheel?
Once again, you're straying off the agenda, and I'm going to finish with this. This council gave the money, no this administration. The council gave it. If you want a detailed response, Paul has already given you it. So that's your answer.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Lambie. In terms of the £3 million, right, as you pointed out, it is made up of two component parts, right? So there had been £1 million which had been earmarked since the start of the year, and then through that November paper, there was a further amount identified of £2 million. Now, at that point in November, SLLC had serious concerns about their ability to conclude the financial year without making a significant loss. At that point, they estimated the loss is towards £2 million, right? And that was assuming the £1 million we had said they would get additional at the start of the year. Now, what that would have meant was that SLLC would have to curtail its operations. It would have to cease employing staff, and it would have to begin closing facilities, probably immediately at very short notice. And it would need to do that in order to claw back a loss of that extent across a period of less than half a year, right? So it would have had a disproportionate impact on their activities. So that was a primary reason for that £2 million additional payment. It allowed SLLC to continue functioning with all the premises that were open in October 2022. It meant those facilities were still open, heated, lit, available to be accessed by communities across the winter. And there was a very real risk that that wouldn't have been the case if additional funding hadn't been paid. So in that communities continued to have access to their facilities across the winter, then that £3 million went entirely towards that Warm Welcome initiative. And it also allowed the communities to have access to free lets, free swimming, as the numbers in the report indicate. And the case studies as well indicate to the rear of the document. Now, coming to your other point around has this money paid for the settlement that was made by SLLC? Per the discussions I've had with SLLC, and I need to just draw attention to the fact that that is a question for them primarily and for their board, right? But in terms of the discussions I've had with the company secretary, their draft accounts state that an extraordinary item of expenditure was incurred during 2022-23, being the settlement of an outstanding employee tribunal case. £580,000 of funds had been placed into the general reserve at the end of the previous financial year and were drawn down to provide for the majority of the settlement, with a balance funded from a better than expected overall operating position. So they make reference in their own accounts to the role that their reserves played in meeting that settlement and meeting the vast majority of it. So hopefully, Councillor Lambie, that answers the question that you've asked today. Thank you.
Entry, please. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, as you guys know, I'm one of the board members of SLC, and I can't discuss the information I know about their budget and cash flow and things like that. And it's, you know, I basically tongue-tied. I can't say any further, but it's clear to me in the timescales and the timeline, and as it's laid out in this agenda paper, that £1 million has gone, which was earmarked for the community, has gone into this. And I just don't know why it was done behind the door, in the back room. You know, there was a backroom agreement.
Boss, here again, we're starting to stray, and I'm going to finish with this. You're on the board of SLLC. You're a board member.
Yep.
You take it up at the board. It's an rail.
I've exhausted avenues.
We're not going to discuss any. Paul has given you a comprehensive report
Thank you. It's under 4.1, under digital inclusion. This could potentially be a good legacy for communities having improved Wi-Fi. Obviously, libraries will continue to deliver on that legacy, but places like the John Wright Sports Centre, I'd be quite interested in finding out, is that something we can still advertise to our constituents? Is there a nice space for people to use that Wi-Fi? So that's one question. And the second is on 5.2.1, just to ask on the Scottish Welfare Fund, is it oversubscribed every year, just to understand a bit more about the state of that?
Paul.
Listen, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Rob. In terms of the improved Wi-Fi, that's there and that's a permanent thing, right? So that's available to be used by customers and visitors to each of these facilities. So it's still there. And sorry, Councillor Rob, could you repeat the second part of your question? I'm really sorry.
That's okay. I mean, I can ask about the John Wright specifically. Obviously, the libraries will continue with that legacy, but it's to understand if in a sports centre, where is the space for people to have a nice space to use the Wi-Fi? And the second one is on the Scottish Welfare Fund, if it's used up and oversubscribed every year.
Okay, Councillor Rob, I think David's looking to come in, right, in relation to the John Wright and the ability there to use the Wi-Fi. Craig Ferguson is with me today. So Craig is the head of service and the Scottish Welfare Fund falls within Craig's remit. So Craig's probably best placed to give a wee bit more detail about the level of uptake on the Welfare Fund. So with your indulgence, I'd pass that one to Craig. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yeah, I mean, certainly what we've seen over the past 2 to 3 years is significant demand in respect of the Scottish Welfare Fund. The Council has to manage the available funds, obviously, that we have, and essentially making sure that it supports as many households as possible. I think certainly in respect of the Financial Wellbeing Support Fund, that has given the Council another lever to actually distribute cash payments, which very much kind of supplements the role of the Scottish Welfare Fund. That's something obviously the Council has set up itself, and as the report refers to, in redirecting funds previously earmarked for energy payments, we can continue using the Financial Wellbeing Support Fund as a further route to support households with cash payments going forward over the next 2 years. Thank you.
Okay, Kirsten.
If it's used up every year, basically, do we have more demand than the Welfare Fund is? And also on the John Wright's question. Thanks.
So in the John Wright question, I'll probably leave that one for David. Yeah, certainly in respect to the Scottish Welfare Fund, we finished the year with a near to full spend. This reflects the demand that's continually there.
David.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Councillor Rob. And in terms of the John Wright Sports Centre, as you'll be aware, it's got a range of kind of communal spaces in there. So customers and visitors alike, I think, would be welcome. The Southlands Leisure and Culture, I imagine, would welcome as many people as possible into the John Wright Sports Centre, and they'll get access to the Wi-Fi when they're in there. Hopefully take up some sporting pursuits as well. But I'm happy to take that up with the Trust as well to see if we can advertise that in some sort of way. Thank you.
Okay, Kirsten. Thank you. Margaret.
Thank you. It's just a short statement, if you'll bear with me, Chair. I'm not happy about the suggested allegation that Councillor Lambie has made that there has been some sort of backroom deal has gone on regarding leisure and culture. And quite frankly, we need to bring evidence to back up a statement like that. Paul Manning has given a very clear answer to how leisure and culture managed to pay the funds that were due to go out to Mr Campbell, and I, for one, accept that that was the process that was undertaken. In terms of transparency, a meeting has been agreed with the leaders of the council and the group leaders to discuss the report on leisure and culture in more detail, and each group will get an opportunity to analyse that thereafter, and then there will probably be a further opportunity, perhaps at a full council meeting, for an open discussion of the points that each group wishes to raise. And I do wonder if Councillor Lambie has a conflict of interest in that he's party to information that as all the rest of the councillors don't have, because he's a member of the board. That's all I wanted to say on it.
Thanks very much for that. Eileen.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's in regard to a previous colleague's comments on homeless lists. And I don't know how you could compile a straight list would say you've got X amount of people waiting for X amount of houses, but it is more complex than that. And I think it would be interesting for everybody to see figures, because absolutely right, everybody every day gets a letter from, or a notification, email, whatever, from our constituents regarding housing, but also East Kilbride, for instance, had the highest uptake of sale of houses, which compounded the situation in your area. In the rural areas, you know, there's rural, very rural villages where maybe there's houses, but people who live in a more urban setting don't want to necessarily go there. We live in a completely different world from even 5-10 years ago, where there's various reasons for people becoming homeless. You can have breakup of families where the one part of the family are going to go as a unit, but the other person also in that relationship requires a house, where that was never a common thing, you know, before. So you need two houses. You need one for the family unit and one for maybe the ex-partner. You've got sometimes, and I say this and I don't say it lightly, but a revolving door of people who, usually single people, who have complex needs regarding various issues that they're suffering at that time, and they require housing. So it's a very, very big, in my view, you can tell me if I'm wrong, a very, very big, complex issue, and not one that you could just say, well, we've got that amount of people waiting for that amount of houses. You have to look at it and dissect it and find out who is looking for what and where are they looking for what. And for us, we have no 3-bedroomed houses in our area. So when somebody comes, for whatever reason they're coming to you to tell you that they need a 3-bedded house, your heart sinks, because there's not going to be an easy answer for people. So just to say, I want a list, or us to say, I want a list, and you could tell me, well, you've got X amount of people waiting in your area, that isn't giving us the proper figures, because we really need to have a good look at what's happening, because we were flooded during the COVID time. And that hasn't went away. So, and there's peaks and there's troughs. So it was just for that. I think we all need to have a good look at what is going on. And that was just, I think. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And we'll get, Stephen can get that for another date. Okay, right, Mo.
Thank you, Chair. Can I firstly thank the officers for the efforts they put in with dealing with the cost of living crisis. I think there's a lot of work done, and that needs to be appreciated. My question is on page 42, school meal debt. 100,000 was identified and 77,000 has so far been written off. What's the hold up with the other 23,000, Paul?
Paul.
Right. Thanks, Chair. Right. And thanks, Councillor Razak. And just hopefully to put your mind at ease, there was £100,000 of money identified to deal with the issue, right? And thus far, we've identified £77,000 worth of debt that can go against that. So it's not that there's other debt that isn't written off yet. These are all the appropriate cases that have been identified up to this point.
Thank you very
So
much.
that could have been a wee bit clearer, sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mo. David?
Thanks, Chair. So in relation to the question that was asked earlier by Andrea and then the follow-up from Eileen, and I don't want to put Stephen in the spot here, but I wonder if maybe I can provide a bit of an update. The non-urgent repairs were suspended and they're due to start back on the 18th of September, particularly to address the impact that the homelessness is having on our waiting list. And so that's bound to be a positive. But I wonder, Stephen, at this early stage, if there's any information you can give us as to how much that's going to have an impact on the waiting list, the homeless waiting list.
Stephen?
Thanks very much. And thanks for the various questions on homelessness. And you're right, Councillor, it is a complex issue. People become homeless for many, many reasons. None of them are ever straightforward, and everyone's a difficult and tragic story at times. But, the caseload has increased. It's a huge increase. And what we have seen over the past 12 months is almost a 70% increase. It's absolutely huge. But we're managing that really well as a local authority. What we are doing is making sure we've got really strong performance within homelessness, to avoiding repeat homelessness. So whilst the numbers are increasing, the amount of people in repeat homelessness is being managed very, very well by the team. But and then going on to Councillor McLaughlin's question, yeah, you're absolutely right. Non-urgent repairs will be reinstated from the 18th of September. What the target is to reduce the amount of current voids by about 200, and we'd work on the basis if we can reduce voids by 200 within that period of time, about 60 to 65% of those will be allocated to people who are currently urgent homeless. So to answer your question, it will make a considerable difference to reducing homelessness within the next couple of months.
Right, thank you, Stephen, for that. And it's a disgraceful situation we're in, but that's the realities of life.
That's it. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 7, job evaluation back pay. Paul?
Thanks, Chair. So this is about the back pay in relation to the agreed home carers job evaluation and the funding package for that. Paper starts off by making a reference back to the June paper. And I make the point that these are IJB costs. Right, so the Executive Committee was advised in June that the value of the back pay would take a period of time to calculate. The costs would need to be included in the financial position for year 2022-23. That's when they would need to be accounted for. And as the costs in relation to home care, it's that point I made a second ago. It's a delegated service, so the costs fall under the IJB and will form part of the IJB's financial accounts. So what I would take you on to now is the top of the second page of the paper, which is the top of page 50. So that summarises what the back pay settlement is and when it's going to be paid. So we've got a detailed estimate now of £18 million, right, which has been made of the overall costs of back pay for current staff and for leavers. Right, the actual back pay is going to be paid in a couple of weeks' time on the 1st of September. So in terms of how that cost of £18 million is proposed to be met, right, you can see that covered at 4.3 in Table 1. So that's headed up Funding Solution Home Carer Back Pay, and that comes to £18 million. You can see one of the first of the elements is one that has been before you before, right? This was covered at the Executive Committee on the 21st of June. So this relates to the IGB's underspend from year 2022-23, £5.6 million. That was referenced in the June paper. The next item that's in there, it says £7.2 million IGB reserves. And it says there the IGB reserves can be used to meet these costs in year 2022-23. Now that is a point I need to come back to in the second half of the paper. The third item that's down there, it talks about additional IGB underspend for 2022-23. So there was this other amount of £300,000 reported at the end of the year to the IGB that can be used towards that back pay bill. There is also an amount of money in the council reserves which was set aside for home care. So the background is given to that. That was done at the end of year 2019-20. It hasn't been passed over in the intervening period because each year there was an underspend against the home care service. But now it's appropriate to pass that money over. That comes to £2.7 million. So those items which are within the orbit of the IJB are coming to this figure of £15.8 million, right, which is £2.2 million short. And that takes me to the fifth item in that table, and that's about monies which the council had released through the service concession change that was made. There is an amount of that money that remained uncommitted. So there's a figure given there in total of £3.4 million. And the way we use that per this paper is going to be split into two. 2.2 I would use towards that £18 million cost, and that will happen in the old financial year 2022-23, and I'm going to come back to another amount in a minute, right, with the second part of this paper. So in short, that's how that bill that's going to be paid at the start of September will be funded. That's the £18 million. So the second part of the paper, which begins at the top of page 51 in section 5, picks up the fact that this funding solution is going to use the IGB's reserves of £7.2 million, but the IGB was relying on those in year 2023-24 in order to balance its budget. So there's a problem there, and this starts off at section 5.1, but what I'm putting to you is a proposal in terms of how that is dealt with. And what's suggested is that the council provides a one-off contribution to the IGB of £7.2 million to allow the IGB to operate to a balanced budget in year 2023-24. So how will that £7.2 million payment be funded? So the first part of that is covered at section 5.2, and I'm going to look to council reserves. And what I'm proposing is that £4.7 million of that, the vast majority of that, is met from funds that are currently held in the council reserves. They're held for a purpose, but without any definite dates yet for utilising. So moving forward as a council, if we need that funding, we may have to look to borrow for those funds needed or look to future capital programmes in order to fund that spend. So that would take us to this figure of £4.7 million. The second part relates to an element of our year-end 22-23 underspend, which remained uncommitted, which comes to £750,000. And then at section 5.4, I'm pointing to the rest of that uncommitted service concession money, which is £1.2 million, and the balance of residual COVID funding that I've got within council reserves of £500,000. So those four items come to this figure of £7.2 million. That would go as an extra payment in 2023-24, and it allows the IGB to work to a balanced budget. So the foot of page 51 summarises that position. And the table there at the foot of the page also summarises how we're funding that extra payment in the current year of £7.2 million. Just on the final page of the paper, I would make a point that this does leave the solutions that we have included in the paper that went in June for the 2024, 25 and 25-6 budgets intact. So as it says at 6.3, it doesn't use any of the funding solution identified to support 24-25 and 25-26 in the budget strategy. It leaves those solutions intact. The financial implications does pick up the fact that if in the future we need to borrow for some of those commitments against the money in reserves that's now going to be used to fund that payment, and we borrowed, there would be a cost. So the cost is picked out in that section 8.1 and 8.2. I would make the point that there's a figure quoted there of £470,000 per annum. That won't impact on us before 2025-26, and it is highly unlikely to be to that value in year 2025-26. It's likely to come as a burden in later years. Chair, if I can go back to the recommendations at the beginning, it's looking for noting of that payment in terms of the costs of £18 million and how that's going to be accounted for. It's looking for noting of the funding solution in Table 1. It's looking for approval of the £2.2 million uncommitted service concession monies, and it's looking at recommendation 4 for approval of that additional payment of £7.2 million in year 23-24. So again, Chair, long, complicated report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Paul. I'll move that report.
I'll second.
Is it Richard? I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Great to see that fairer pay for home carers and now receiving their back pay is great to see. Probably just a couple of points, if I may. First of all, the IGIB reserves, and they have difficulty year on year as healthcare rises and people get older. And it's the effects that has going forward. It looks like sometimes we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're taking that money out, but we're putting it back in. There may be a future motion coming forward to full council that has been sent round by Unison lately, and you rightly said, Paul, 6.3, this that you have at the moment doesn't have any effect on the budget going forward. However, one of my concerns is if this future motion and the other caring roles and the job evaluations that come forward from that will then have an effect again. And it's great to see that we can, and this may be a flippant comment, but it's great to see that we can draw in funds when we need to. When we've Larkhall Leisure Centre on the go, we're scrimping and scraping, but we've got Larkhall Leisure Centre that we had no funds for, but we're scraped to get, again, £80 million. But that's just a flippant comment. But I go back to my original question, is if this future motion does come forward and these other caring roles, which I'm not saying these people are entitled to, they are entitled to, but if the Scottish Government doesn't give us fairer funding for councils, then we are going to be back here. We've scrimped and scraped. We've robbed Peter to pay Paul everywhere we can. Where are we going to get the rest of this money?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Nelson. I think every member in the council would back the call for fairer funding for local government. We have done for some period of time, and we've done that on a cross-party basis. We'll continue to make those points, including responding to the Scottish Parliamentary Committee's pre-budget scrutiny consultation, and we very heavily will make those points. Just a comment in relation to the circulated communication I think members received. Obviously, any motion would be coming from elected members. They don't come from that source. We find it unusual, the approach that's been taken. And we have a job evaluation scheme that our colleagues in the trade unions help design. They participate fully in the job evaluation process, and we are surprised at the communication that went round, which potentially would have is looking to circumvent the agreed process that they have been party to, and potentially taking one group of staff and jumping the queue because there are other job evaluations which will be conducted. We would encourage, and we will do, in responding to our trade union colleagues, we would encourage them to follow the procedure that we have jointly agreed with them in respect of any discipline that or job role that they feel has substantively changed and would meet the criteria for job evaluation. So I think that's kind of where I would like to leave it. We have had good relationships with our trade unions in South Lanarkshire and always have done. We will look to work constructively with them, but we find the approach that was taken to try to prompt a motion to council an unusual step. Thanks.
John.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I'd like to thank Paul for his report. It was very detailed. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. I had the pleasure at the last full council meeting of seconding my motion regarding the concerns we had about the completion of the home carers grading outcome. And I was really glad to see that their efforts to achieve better pay and grading and recognition was successful. More importantly, I'm really glad to see that we've been able to find funding to make sure that that recognition is realised for the wonderful job they do. So I'm not going to say much more on it at this time, just that I'm glad that we've been able to find the funding going forward, and hopefully we'll be able to continue doing that into the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Can I agree the report, folk?
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek approval for two property transactions. One, which is a transfer between accounts, and the second is approval to dispose of it's a very small parcel of land to a private person. The details are set out in Section 4. Section 4.1 tells us about Ball Green Hall. This is a proposed transfer of the former Ball Green Hall to the HRA. And the section confirms that the Executive Committee have previously declared this asset as surplus in September 2019. While the asset was subject to a previous CAT application, this was subsequently withdrawn by the community group involved. Colleagues in housing have now expressed an interest in the site. They've undertaken a capacity study and have made a request for this site to be transferred to the HRA with a view of bringing this site forward within the affordable housing programme. And details of this are set out in Appendix A. Section 4.2 tells us about the land transfer. This is a very small section of land. It's currently held in the Communities and Enterprise account. It's about 42 square metres, and subject to approval by committee today, that will be used for a bit of garden extension. And again, details of that are included in Appendix B. The financial implications are set out in Section 6, and in both accounts or in both transactions, it would generate a capital receipt to the general fund. So the recommendations are in Section 2, subject to committee approval. We'd like Ball Green Hall transferred from the general account into the HRA to bring forward a housing development, and a committee approved recommendation 2 will see a small transfer of an area of land from a general account, and that would be to a person who will extend a garden in East Kilbride. And if you give approval to both of these, it will just allow us to get the estates team ready to close these deals and process these proposed disposals. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Can we agree that report? Thank you. Scotland's finances, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So, as part of its pre-budget scrutiny, the Parliament's Finance and Public Administration Committee at the end of June issued a call for evidence. So this will form part of the basis of that committee's pre-budget scrutiny for 2024-25. Part of what the Parliamentary Committee looks for, right, is given on the second and third pages of this paper. So they've put out a call for responses. It's a consultation. Our consultation response is attached at the rear of the paper. In their paperwork at the beginning of this, the Finance and Public Admin Committee within the Parliament note a number of challenges. So they split those into short to medium term and longer term challenges. In terms of the short to medium term challenges, they reference insufficiency of resource compared to spending plans. This is for the Scottish Government, and that extends across revenue and capital. Then they move on and they talk about their longer term plans. So there are challenges around population. So you can see there on the second page of the paper, the Scottish population is projected to fall by 8% And elsewhere, they reference an ageing population across that period as well. And that feeds on into a number of demands that are going to apply to public services across the period that's been talked about. So section 4.3 picks up the consultation questions themselves. So you can see references there to how should the budget respond to the challenges that have been mapped out. There's a reference to the 3 pillars strategic approach, the capital budget, implications of a declining capital budget, whether the priorities are the right ones to address the implications of the falling population, how should the government address the funding gap. So you can see questions 1 to 10 referenced there. So our response is in Appendix 1 at the rear, and it's there for approval by the Executive Committee, or absolutely contribution to it as the Executive Committee sees fit. In terms of the key points within the draft response as it stands, it does look, and you can see these at section 4.5, it looks for the role of local government to be recognised and recognised appropriately. Looks for recognition of the fact that the resource allocated to councils has eroded over a period of time. It does make reference to the fact that we're still essentially working to single-year budgets, and it stresses the severity, right, of operating in what is at the moment an extreme inflationary climate. And it also looks for acknowledgement from the government in putting together its budget to take into account these pressures and the impact on local government services, and also to weigh up new initiatives that may come from the government against these pressures and against the impact on local services. So as I say, Chair, the response is there in full at Appendix 1. It looks, the paper back at recommendation 2.1 for approval of the response, and if that's given, that we would submit the response to the Scottish Parliament later on today. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Is there any questions or observations to the report? Margaret?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to thank Paul for the report. I think the response is excellent, and I think it certainly focused the attention on some of the issues that have really hampered local authorities, particularly in relation to the short-termism and the ring fencing. I'm pleased to see that at least there is discussion at Scottish Government level in terms of changing that approach altogether, and I definitely agree that would allow local authorities to plan in the longer term, and more importantly, actually to focus on what the local needs are, because over the past 12 years, the autonomy has been removed from local government to be able to do that. Having said that, local authorities, particularly South Lanarkshire, have still did a remarkable job. And we've seen that through some of the papers that have came here today, including the cost of living. I think they have did a magnificent job in spite of policies from Scottish Government level that has actually strangled local authorities, and particularly in relation to the 30% cut in capital grants, the issues around not being able to do preventative work, the health outcomes, all of that. I think the response nails all that. And I'm pleased to see that at least there seems to be, for the limited time that Humes has got left, a willingness to actually listen to some of these issues. So thank you again for the response. I think it's excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Robert?
Thanks very much, Chair. I just wanted really to echo that. I mean, we've got a very stark report here, haven't we, on anybody's account in terms of where we're going. And the background to it, I don't think we should shy away from, has been a reduced share of the Scottish Government budget, which has had increased budgets over recent years and a reduced share going to local government. Now, there's been some quite interesting arrangements recently at COSLA with regard to Humza Yousaf's partnership arrangements and all that. Now, I think the urge that I would make really here is that the Scottish Government come through good on that. They've got to make good the promises of partnership. If they're just words, it's just no use at all. We've got to have some restoration of the losses we've made over the past period. And I think the report is very realistic in terms of the extent to which we can not manage new things, if you like, and have got to concentrate on doing the existing things properly. The Scottish Government has had a creeping tendency, if I can put it that way, to take things into its own account, to put restrictions on us, to put conditions on us and things of that kind. We've clearly got to move forward in a way which allows us to focus on the things we can actually do. As I said before, local government is actually much better placed than central government in many, many areas to do the necessary things to tackle the deprivation, the poverty, the delivery of services, all the rest of it that go with these things. And I do hope the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament take some account of all this going forward. Nobody underestimates the problem. I mean, they've got a big issue. Westminster Government's got a big issue. No two ways about that at all. But within that, within the priorities going forward, let's stop trying to do all sorts of new things which we can't manage, focus on what we can do, and for goodness sake, provide the local government organisations with the funding to do this properly. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks for that, Robert. Can we give a report, colleagues?
Agreed.
That'll be sent this afternoon. Oh, sorry. Katie.
Button wasn't particularly responsive. Just to come back on it, Robert Brown's points, and I hope you will allow this, Chair, because I know you were uncomfortable with this discussion earlier. We are all in agreement about fair funding for local government. As was mentioned before, that's cross-party. And cross-party, we've had those discussions at COSLA, and I think there is a great deal of hope and opportunity moving forward as we do with the Verity House agreement. And I think that's something which we're all watching very carefully. However, I do have to pick up Robert's point about the Scottish Government receiving increased funding. Can we contextualise this? We've just had a paper about cost of living. Scottish Government is spending almost £3 billion a year at the moment mitigating the effects of the Tories at Westminster, whether that's the disastrous mini-budget, hard Brexit, cruel social security policy.
Katie, stick to the agenda and stop me.
I'm sorry, Chair, but Robert Brown and the previous item, I'm sorry, Chair, but your coalition partner, Councillor Brown, on the previous item and on this item has been allowed to go off topic. It's right that we should have these discussions in Council when these points are being made, because at the end of the day, businesses and households are paying a steep price for the economic mismanagement of the UK government, and thousands of households are being pushed into poverty, and that's the conversation which we've just had. So I've got to say it's very frustrating, Chair, when favouritism is shown, perhaps, how it could be perceived by people who are watching about who is allowed to speak.
Katie, I'm speaking. Listen, you were asked to approve a report, every councillor in this room and on this. Let's just stick to the agenda, because I ain't allowing, whether it be Labour, Lib Dem, SNP or Tory, to start playing political games in this chamber. It's no one. We're here to represent the people of South Lanarkshire. You were asked.
Indeed, Chair. This meeting has been live streamed, so that will be very apparent who's been allowed to
I'm
speak.
speaking.
Thank you.
You were asked to agree a report. If you didn't agree with the report, amend the report. Nobody's amending the report, so the report's going ahead. It was compiled by the Chief Executive and his officers. So that's where we're leaving it. Okay? Because we could be here all day talking and scoring brownie points, and it doesn't serve the people we represent one iota. So I'm no, John, I see, no, he's got hands down. Right, Katie, do you want to finish off, but don't start talking about governments and this and that and Brexit. We're not going down that road. John.
Chair, I think my microphone
right, Katie, right, on you go.
Being cut back and forwards.
Right, on you go.
Okay, well, it's very difficult then to make the points which I would like to, Chair, within the parameters of what I'm allowed to say.
The reason is, Katie, let's get it clear. The reason's quite simple, because we're not using the report to have a political battle in this chamber. It's as simple as that. And if you don't like it, somebody will need to take me to the chair. But I'm not allowing this to descend into a slanging match between people. People are entitled to their opinion. People are entitled to be heard, but they're not entitled to use this forum to score brownie points. End of story. So if you've got anything...
Yeah, I'm using this forum to stand up for my constituents in my ward.
And that's what we all do. Katie, that's what we all do.
But your point has been made. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John.
on, you've made comments to Katie there about nobody using this for political gain. Yet as chair, you've allowed certain speakers this afternoon to bring in things which are not unpolitical. Robert Brown brought in political items, so did previous speakers, and you've allowed that. So you must, at the end of the day, take comment from other councillors as well. It's only fair, Jerry, if you're the chair and you start down that road and you allow people like Robert Brown to come up with things like that, then you must allow us to come back and answer those. Or you're not doing a fair chair.
No, well, John, right, you make a point here. Here's my point. Here's my point. And the councillors here can judge it or no. I'm here to preside over the running of this committee. I'm here to put forward reports that this administration have agreed. The report was put forward. It was eloquently answered by Paul Manning, the finance director. As far as I was concerned, folk weren't opposed to it because nobody came in to amend it. So at the end of the day, if we are going to stick to the report, you can talk to the coos come at him. If you're going to start trying to score, well, he said this and she said that, that does not serve the people that we represent one iota. We're in the middle of a bloody crisis in this country with cuts and more cuts and more cuts. So we are trying to conduct this debate in a reasonable manner and allow everybody to come in. And I'll no stifle debate, whether I like it or no, because that's what democracy is about. And all I'm asking for, do we agree with the report? Is there anything that we want to amend? Nobody said that to me. So as far as I'm concerned, that's it. That's the thing finished.
Jerry, we were quite happy to accept the report.
Fine, thank you.
Happy to accept the report.
Fine.
As were probably other parties. But if you start coming in saying you're going to accept the report and then you start having a dig at the Scottish Government.
I never had a dig at anybody, John.
No, you never had a dig.
Thank you.
But Robert and others had a dig. And
No,
that's where your position as chair needs to stop that.
Dear
You can't come in and have a dig at Katie for bringing up a political point when you've already allowed it with other people. So
But John, here's the argument. John, here's the argument. So Katie came in and make a political statement, and then somebody for the Labour benches could come in to argue that, and then somebody could come in for the Tories to argue that. Does that take us forward regarding the report? The answer,
all I'm saying
no.
is,
Nobody should be using.
Jerry, is you should have stopped it in the first place.
Right, maybe I should have. Maybe I should have. Maybe you're right. Thanks very much. Can we agree with the report, colleagues? Thanks very much. Item 10, David Booth will take this one. The Glasgow City Region City Deal, and it's A72 Lanark Road. David.
Thank you very much, Chair. This report is to advise the Committee on action taken in terms of Standing Order number 37C, because of the timescales involved by myself and the Chair and ex officio member, to approve a revised business case for the A72 Lanark Road M74 Junction 7 signalisation element of the Larkhall Community Growth Area City Deal project. Chair, I won't go into detail in terms of this this project itself, because it came to this committee on the 17th of May. Subsequent to that report being approved on the 17th of May, the unfortunately successful contractor subsequently withdrew from the process post-award. This then required the revised full case business case to cover the next best submission tendered for the project, and that's what this paper does. So we now, given the timescales involved, have awarded the project to the second placed bidder. The revised project cost is 2.245 million, comprising the 1.931 million of City Deal funding, which is 86% of the share, and 314,000 of South Lanarkshire Council funding, which is 14% of the share. The construction contract is expected to commence on site in September or October. And just to update the committee as well, the contract has now actually been awarded to the second place contractor, and discussions are ongoing at this particular moment with the successful contractor, along with Transport Scotland, over mobilisation and the resources available to complete the work and start the work. And officers will keep local elected members updated on those discussions. With that, Chair, I revert back to the recommendations, and that's that the action taken in terms of Standing Order 37C has been noted by the committee in terms of the approval of the revised full business case and approval to seek grant funding in accordance with City deal distribution process as outlined in the report.
Thanks, David. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Ross, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Just like to say that it's also disappointing that the contractor withdrew post-award and the associated costs and slight delay. But it's good to see that the revised business cases came forward relatively quickly without too much delay to the start of the project. Because as I said last time, it's been a long time coming, this. But I'd just like to ask, are we able to share the reasons why the contractor withdrew post-award? I know elsewhere in the council, you've seen the impacts of increased material prices. So just wondering if we're able to share that information or not.
No. Yeah, no.
I'm not sure we're able to provide that information.
We'll just get on and get this sorted out for the folk that live there. That's the main item. Colleagues, I've got no other items of urgent business. Thanks for your attendance today.